Today we're talking about carbon-containing molecules. So carbon has an atomic mass of 12, an atomic number of 6, and it's very useful in the chemistry of life because it has 4 points that it can attach to other things through sharing electrons. And so, for example, if I were to draw another carbon here, that means it is sharing 2 electrons with that carbon, and then the rest of these would probably just be grabbed up by hydrogens. We use carbon so often in chemistry that we don't even draw them. If you see a line, that means shared electrons. And if you see a change in angle, that usually just means carbon. So for example, this molecule here would contain 1 oxygen, and then it would have 1, 2, 3, 4 carbons. We also don't draw hydrogens. And so again, carbon can attach to 4 things. And so, for example, this carbon here has 2 things attached to it, meaning that there are 2 hydrogens that are invisible. We don't draw hydrogens. So if we were to draw hydrogens, this molecule here we'd have to include a hydrogen here, and that's just a lot to draw, and there's no point. We get it, right? So when you see something like this, that means there's a carbon here, and a carbon here, and there are also hydrogens here, here, and here, 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 and here, and here, and here. Okay, so that's the basics. Now we're going to talk about these molecules here and this one. These are all carbon-based molecules. You are actually a carbon-based life form. You are an organic life form, which basically just means you contain carbon. All right, so this is very relevant as a topic because it discusses what we eat, and that is a worthwhile thing to know from science. So let's take a look at a big misconception people have. A long while ago, the FDA and other government organizations helped to come up with a food pyramid. This is basically a suggestion on what you should and should not be eating. The truth is, this is wrong for a lot of reasons, and I'll include a video that kind of talks about that. You can watch it. You don't have to actually watch the video for this assignment, but it's worth your education. You should know how to eat. All right, so next we'll talk about fats. So this is actually a more accurate representation of what you should be eating instead of the old food pyramid. You should focus on eating healthy fats, and then vegetables should actually be down here. Healthy fats with vegetables. You should also be periodically taking a break so that you have a chance for that fat to be digested. Then you should have some proteins and a little bit of fruit. So actually, this is a good food table, but I would actually put the veggies down here. All right, so fats. Let's look at fats. What is fat? I've heard so much that fat is bad. We should not eat fat. You hear low-fat diets all the time. People are reducing their fat intake. But that is kind of misleading. There was this push for everything in supermarkets to be fat-free. Fat was seen as the enemy when we created this incorrect food pyramid. We put fat way up here. It is the enemy. It is the enemy. But actually, fat is not your enemy. Fat is an important part of your diet. You need it in your diet. You need it for a lot of things that we're going to talk about. It turns out the problem is when you eat this stuff with fat. And I'll describe why. So basically, there are 2 types of food that you can eat. There are carbs, carbohydrates, and then there's fat, right? Generally, when we eat fat, we include sugar with it. Or bread. Like a pizza, for example, will have fat from cheese, but also the bread is a carb. And so we tend to combine these things when we eat. And that is a problem because your body preferably takes care of carbs first, and it does not take care of fat. And this is because carbohydrates break down into glucose. If you have high blood sugar, that means high glucose, that is toxic. So your body wants to urgently deal with this. So it prioritizes carbohydrate digestion, and it will deprioritize fat. And so if you're not digesting your fat, you are storing it. And that is what makes you fat. It is not the fact that you're eating fat. It is the fact that you're eating fat plus carbohydrates. And so you should avoid that. Avoid eating fat with carbs. So anyway, this is fat. And I'll include a video here. You can watch it on your own. I'll post a link to it. And this will show you what types of fats you could eat. To just summarize that, there are 3 types. There is saturated fat, which is stuff like butter. There is unsaturated. We call that mono, unsaturated. And then there's actually polyunsaturated fat. So both of these are pretty good for you. Polyunsaturated is the best for you. We typically call these omega fatty acids. But here's the caveat to that, the exception. You can cook with these two. So monounsaturated fats would be things like avocado oil. It's really good for you. So again, I just erased that by accident. There is saturated, there's unsaturated, and then there's polyunsaturated. So these two you can cook with. You should never cook with polyunsaturated fat. An example of that would be vegetable oil. You should actually avoid vegetable oil altogether because while it is a polyunsaturated fat, it's an omega-3. Or sorry, 6. Omega-6s are just bad. You want to avoid them. Avoid vegetable oil altogether. If you have it in your pantry, throw it away, get something else. Never cook with a polyunsaturated fat. An example would be like grapeseed oil. Grapeseed oil is great for you when eaten raw, but when you cook with it, it does something bad. And let me describe that. So you see, when you have a polyunsaturated fat and you add heat, you do what's called hydrogenation. If you don't learn anything else from this lecture, and you fail my course, you fail the SOL, I don't care. I at least want you to hear this. Avoid hydrogenated oils. Hydrogenated oils will kill you, eventually, if you eat them too much. That is because hydrogenated oils are trans fat. Trans fat clogs your arteries, leads to heart disease. Guess what the #1 cause of death in America is? Heart disease, because of the amount of trans fat that we have in our diet. So avoid your trans fats, but don't cook with vegetable oil. Don't cook with polyunsaturated fats. If you're going to cook with an oil, look for mono unsaturated fat. The best example would be algae oil. Does not taste like algae, don't worry. And also avocado oil. Coconut oil is really good for you too, but it smokes. It gets smoky when you heat it up, so avoid that just because you don't want to set off your fire alarm. All right, so let's look at the pieces of fat. They're made of 2 parts. There's a glycerol and a fatty acid. A glycerol is polar. Polar molecules can attach to other polar molecules through cohesion. And then there is the fatty acid. So this is polar, and this is non-polar. So non-polar molecules cannot interact with polar molecules. They cannot have a dipole moment together. There's no hydrogen bonding. So this is hydrogen bonding, which again is temporary. So glycerol then is not going to interact with water. Water will bounce right off of this, meaning it is It will attach to this. So it is hydrophilic. Philic means to love, right? Best example I can think of, we've all heard of this one before. Philia means attraction to, and pedo means child, right? So Um, Unfortunately, we have this problem. Pedophilia is when usually grown men are attracted to much younger boys or girls, right? So it's unfortunate that that's how we know what philia means, but that's just what usually sticks in people's brains. So then hydrophilia is also attraction, but attraction to water. So glycerol will attract water. Whereas phobia is like to fear. So if you have arachnophobia, that is a fear, or not fear, because this is a molecule, it doesn't fear anything. It is a repulsion of water. And so that creates a lot of interesting characteristics. So, for example, if we look at a cell membrane, this is, oops, I just did that, didn't I? This is a cell membrane here. It is the outside of a cell, and it has certain properties because of this attraction, right, to water. So the outside will attract water. Water can move right up to this, right? And then there's also water underneath here. So this is cytoplasm. And this is extracellular fluid. And they hug the sides of this. But then the inside is repelled by water because it has hydrophobia. And so to stay dry, they come together spontaneously. That's a word we've seen before. So this is a spontaneous reaction, meaning no energy is needed for this to form. This is called a lipid bilayer because we have two layers of lipids coming together. It is selectively permeable, meaning some things like water cannot go through because of the center being hydrophobic, and some things are allowed through special channels. There are also small molecules like oxygen that can just move right through because they are small enough, and they are nonpolar. So the rule is basically nonpolar stuff can get through just fine. Polar things have to be moved through. There are two layers, which is why it is a bilayer. And we will talk what happened there. We will talk more about that later. All right, so let's look at some of the uses here. Fat is very important for a lot of things. It helps to create that cell membrane that I talked about. It also makes little tiny vesicles, which are like shipping packages for the inside of a cell. It helps us make hormones. You need fat for things like testosterone and estrogen. It helps things like seals and whales to feel insulated. Their heat does not leave their body. That's what blubber is. It helps us absorb vitamins. You hear the word fat soluble when you look at a vitamin label. That means you need fat to absorb it. We can harness fat as energy through ketosis, and I'll include a video all about that if you're curious. Basically, your body is an engine, and your body can run on carbs or fat, but not really both. So there's carbs and there's fat. If you take in carbs, that means fat gets stored in your body as fat. If you exclude carbs from your diet as much as possible, that fat will actually be used as energy. And the benefit to that is when you are not eating, you will still be burning fat. And so what that means is you'll be burning fat on your body while you're not eating. And that's why people lose so much weight when they try this kind of diet. I'm not saying you should exclude carbs from your diet entirely. You would need to speak to a doctor before following that advice. I am not a doctor, but I will tell you that it works for me. I tend to be on the lean side. All right, so energy storage, like I said, if you eat too much, or especially if you eat carbohydrates, you will store it for later. It also helps us with myelinating our nerves. So if this is a nerve cell helps to transmit signals along this thing here called an axon. So a signal comes into the cell body and goes out of the dendrites. The axon is what carries that signal For an axon to work, we need myelin, so we need fat to coat the axon. This fat comes from saturated fat, and so even butter, things like butter, are a healthy part of our diet if eaten in moderation because it helps to myelinate our nerves. Next, satiating hunger. By eating fat, because it is much more dense in calories than carbohydrates, you actually decrease your hunger. And there are also a lot of very important fats we call omegas. These are polyunsaturated fats. You want as much of this, and this as possible. Omega-6s are good for you for a lot of reasons, but there is one bad reason. The reason you want to avoid omega-6 is because it increases inflammation. Inflammation is like why people have a beer gut. Their belly is extended, right? Inflammation is swelling. Swelling causes a lot of problems for people. You can reduce inflammation by decreasing omega-6. And the way you do that is avoid things like vegetable oils and avoid low-quality meats. They can have a lot of omega-6s. If you want to learn more about omega-3s and 6s and 7s, here's a video for you to watch. And again, this is optional. All right, so that is fat. It can be good, it can be bad. It depends on what type of fat you eat, and it depends on what you eat with it. Next, we will talk about proteins and carbohydrates. And then in our last lecture, we'll talk about this. All right, see ya.